Police have confirmed an FBI raid at a massage business.
Police busted massage parlor in downtown Franklin.
West Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force carried out search warrants at 3 massage parlors.
Nationwide operation involving hundreds of law enforcement.
Federal authorities have just delivered one of the most significant human trafficking crackdowns of the year. A coordinated multi-state raid targeting a sprawling network of Chinese-run massage parlors operating quietly beneath the surface of ordinary American life. In a single week of non-stop enforcement known as Operation Coast to Coast, more than 30 suspects were taken into custody, and over 60 victims were rescued from forced labor and sexual exploitation. The scope of the investigation stunned even veteran agents because of how far the network had spread, from Texas and California to New York, Missouri, and Oklahoma. For years, many assumed trafficking of this kind existed only on the fringes of major cities or near international borders. This week shattered that belief. What the investigation revealed was a transnational criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight, using unremarkable storefronts and suburban strip malls to traffic women across the country while funneling millions in profits back to overseas crime syndicates in China. What looked like ordinary spas and wellness centers were in reality a nationwide system of confinement, coercion, and profit built with precision and secrecy. The arrests alone would have made headlines, but the pattern they exposed was even more disturbing. Homeland Security Investigations (HSI) agents say the network functioned with the discipline of an organized cartel, rotating victims between states every few weeks, forging business licenses, falsifying lease records, and laundering money through shell companies disguised as wellness consultancies and acupuncture importers. Each spa served as a node in a digital web, coordinated through encrypted group chats, online payment processors, and courier networks that ensured cash moved quickly and invisibly. Victims, mostly Chinese and Southeast Asian women, were drawn in through fraudulent job ads promising legitimate work in the U.S. hospitality or beauty industry. Once they arrived, their passports were confiscated, their phones monitored, and their identities erased. Many spoke little or no English and were threatened with deportation if they resisted. They were forced to live behind curtained partitions, sleeping on thin mattresses in airless back rooms, under constant surveillance. Investigators described the conditions as industrialized exploitation, a modern assembly line of human suffering. The speed and precision of the operation reflected how deeply embedded this hidden economy had become. In the early hours of the crackdown, tactical teams from HSI, local police, and more than 150 partner agencies executed simultaneous warrants at over 20 locations nationwide. In one Texas city block alone, agents breached 3 neighboring storefronts that secretly shared a single concealed hallway, proof that the traffickers had deliberately fused their operations into the very structure of suburban America. By midday, the full scope of the network had begun to emerge. Investigators recovered ledgers of coded transactions, digital hard drives, and dozens of counterfeit immigration documents linking the spas to a larger organization based out of Fujian province, operating under the guise of business cultural exchanges. Financial analysts traced over $12 million in suspicious transfers routed through crypto wallets and shadow accounts in Hong Kong. Federal officials say this was not an isolated case of local wrongdoing, it was a command and control system spanning continents. At the top of the hierarchy sat organizers who rarely set foot on U.S. soil, directing operations through intermediaries and collecting profits via digital channels. In Washington, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas called the raid a decisive blow against an invisible empire of exploitation. The Justice Department confirmed that charges will range from human trafficking and racketeering to money laundering, visa fraud, and organized crime participation. But for the agents who led the raids, the numbers were only part of the story. Behind every door they breached were faces, frightened, exhausted, and uncertain of what freedom even meant anymore. One HSI agent described the moment a victim broke down in tears when she realized she wasn't being arrested, whispering, "I thought you were here to send me back." As shelters filled with rescued victims and translators worked through the night to document their stories, investigators began connecting the final dots. Some of the rescued women had been trafficked across as many as 8 different states in a single year. Others had been in captivity for more than half a decade. By week's end, Operation Coast to Coast had dismantled a nationwide pipeline of abuse, but officials warned that this was only one branch of a much larger global structure. The evidence seized, including encrypted phones and offshore financial records, is now being analyzed by the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Division and Interpol, potentially leading to new arrests overseas. This isn't just about massage parlors, one senior investigator said. It's about a criminal economy that thrives on invisibility and the women trapped inside it. As night fell over the command centers in Austin and Los Angeles, the screens showed faces instead of maps, the rescued finally visible. For the first time in years, they were no longer inventory in someone else's business model. They were people again.
We have really focused on this human trafficking issue, and it's gotten really interesting lately. Have y'all seen the Chinese component of this? This is crazy.
Agents also uncovered evidence that the trafficking network had infiltrated legitimate sectors far beyond the massage industry. Property managers, logistics brokers, and even small business accountants were found to be complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in maintaining the illusion of legitimacy that allowed the operation to flourish for years. Investigators traced shell leases signed under fake names, rental payments made through cryptocurrency wallets, and entire companies registered to post office boxes or empty storefronts. What looked like normal local businesses, nail salons, laundromats, even wellness supply stores, were quietly laundering the profits of human misery. Federal prosecutors are now building what they describe as one of the largest multi-agency trafficking indictments in recent memory. It involves Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, the FBI, the Department of Justice, IRS Criminal Division, and state task forces from more than 10 states. Officials say the probe began nearly 3 years ago after a single suspicious wire transfer flagged by a regional bank in Houston. That one transaction, a modest $7,500 payment to a wellness consultancy, opened the door to a vast criminal ecosystem connecting dozens of states and millions of dollars. As the digital evidence was decrypted, investigators pieced together a network with layers of hierarchy. Recruiters in China, transporters across borders, handlers in American cities, and financiers abroad who managed the flow of illicit money. Each layer was insulated by shell companies and coded communication channels. Messages retrieved from encrypted apps revealed discussions about inventory rotations, a term traffickers use to describe moving women between parlors to keep them disoriented and dependent. Others referred to clients as visits and payments as gifts, using emojis and numbers to disguise the real content from digital filters. The rescued women are now under federal protection, receiving medical care, trauma counseling, and legal aid through specialized non-governmental organizations. Many of them, agents said, were initially too afraid to speak, conditioned by years of threats that their families in China would face retaliation if they talked. Some had been promised that compliance would earn them freedom, a promise that never came. For them, Operation Coast to Coast wasn't just a rescue mission. It was their first step toward reclaiming an identity stripped away by manipulation and fear. The aftermath of the raids has also sparked international dialogue. U.S. diplomatic channels are now in contact with Chinese officials demanding cooperation in dismantling the financial networks enabling these crimes. But officials privately admit progress is slow. Many of the syndicates are intertwined with powerful business interests and operate under the protection of regional crime families. These are not random operators, one federal agent said. They are multinational criminal organizations with infrastructure, hierarchy, and strategy, and they have adapted faster than most law enforcement agencies could keep up. What makes this operation especially significant, analysts say, is its message that human trafficking has evolved into a globalized system that no longer hides in the margins. It thrives in the open, behind signs that promise relaxation and healing. It uses the same financial systems, marketing tools, and digital platforms that legitimate businesses rely on. The discovery challenges long-standing assumptions about what trafficking looks like. Not a smuggler's den on the border, but a spa next to a grocery store, a clinic down the street, a business that appears indistinguishable from the one next door. Officials stress that the crackdown is only the beginning. Hundreds of additional leads are now being pursued across several states, targeting property owners, money mules, and front companies. DHS and the FBI have launched a joint task force dedicated to mapping every link in the syndicate's chain, from recruiters in Asia to landlords in American suburbs. This operation showed us how deep the roots go, said one senior HSI agent. But we're not just pulling weeds anymore, we're digging up the soil. The success of Operation Coast to Coast represents a rare intersection of speed, coordination, and political will, but it also exposes the staggering challenge ahead. For every trafficking network exposed, others remain hidden, fueled by the same combination of greed, coercion, and silence. Yet for the survivors rescued in this operation, and for the agents who risked their lives to free them, this week marked a turning point. It proved that even the darkest, most organized systems of exploitation can be pierced when persistence meets purpose, and that justice, though delayed, still finds its way through the cracks of silence. The coordination behind Operation Coast to Coast was unlike anything federal agents had attempted in recent years. What began as fragmented intelligence reports from a handful of states eventually evolved into one of the most tightly synchronized law enforcement actions against human trafficking ever carried out on U.S. Over 150 law enforcement agencies were involved, from small-town sheriff's departments to elite federal task forces, all connected through Homeland Security's Human Trafficking Training Center, HTTC. The center acted as the brain of the operation, compiling tips, financial data, and surveillance logs into a single intelligence grid that could track movements, payments, and digital communications in real time. Each jurisdiction handled a critical piece of the larger puzzle. Some focused on undercover infiltration of local parlors and escort services, others on digital forensics, tracing encrypted chat logs and cloud-stored ledgers that map the hierarchy of the network. Specialized financial units followed the money trail, uncovering hundreds of transactions disguised as consulting fees, import costs, or real estate management payments. The interagency collaboration was so detailed that in the final 48 hours before the raids, tactical teams held hourly briefings through secure encrypted channels to coordinate timing down to the minute. When the order was finally given, simultaneous raids across 5 states erupted at dawn. In Texas, armored vehicles blocked roads as agents entered suspected properties under sealed warrants. In California, FBI field teams stormed suburban storefronts that had been under surveillance for weeks. In Missouri and Oklahoma, local police worked alongside Homeland Security agents to clear strip malls, private residences, and storage facilities used as transport hubs. Every action was planned to collapse the entire network in one decisive strike, leaving no room for escape, communication, or evidence destruction. By the end of the week, 30 suspects were in federal custody, each one tied to a different layer of the trafficking chain. The charges span the full spectrum of organized crime, human trafficking conspiracy, immigration, fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and prostitution-related offenses. For the first time, prosecutors invoked federal racketeering and transnational organized crime statutes, the same legal weapons once used against drug cartels and international terror cells. Officials called it a landmark shift, signaling that human trafficking would now be prosecuted with the same intensity as narcotics and arms smuggling. Among those arrested were several mid-level coordinators, the logistical backbone of the syndicate. These individuals had arranged flights for incoming victims, purchased burner phones, forged identification papers, and managed offshore wire transfers that kept the operation funded. Their capture, investigators said, represented a breakthrough, the first tangible proof of command and control links stretching across multiple states and continents. But what struck agents the hardest was not the arrests, but the rescue of the victims. Among them was a 14-year-old girl discovered during a linked raid in another state. She told investigators she had been trafficked through online advertisements, moved repeatedly between cities, and forced into servitude under threats to her family. Her trafficker, a 38-year-old man with prior convictions for identity theft and visa fraud, was taken into federal custody within hours. He now faces multiple charges, including child exploitation and human trafficking. Federal officials described her case as a devastating example of how deep the web runs, a mirror reflecting the evolution of trafficking in the digital age, where social media and anonymity fuel the modern slave trade. Authorities stressed that her rescue was not an isolated case, but part of a growing pattern. Increasingly, minors are being drawn into sophisticated trafficking networks that manipulate immigration systems, exploit cultural barriers, and use encrypted technology to stay invisible. Homeland Security analysts now warn that traffickers no longer rely solely on physical coercion. Instead, they weaponize fear, debt, and misinformation to keep victims silent. As the dust settled from the raids, the mission's focus shifted from enforcement to recovery. The Federal Command Center overseeing Operation Coast to Coast immediately activated a network of humanitarian partners to handle the aftermath. Organizations such as Safe House Alliance, Freedom Network USA, and the Salvation Army's Trafficking Response Team were deployed to triage centers set up near the raid sites. Within hours, temporary command posts were transformed into makeshift care facilities equipped with medical stations, food supplies, and crisis counselors. The rescued women and girls were in dire condition, disoriented, malnourished, dehydrated, and terrified. Many had lived for months, even years, under near-total confinement. Some hadn't seen daylight in weeks. When agents entered the rooms, many victims recoiled, believing they were being arrested. Translators and trauma specialists worked side by side with federal officers to gently explain that they were now free. Law enforcement officials were instructed to treat each person not as a suspect, but as a survivor, a crucial distinction in operations of this kind, where years of psychological conditioning often blur the victim's understanding of freedom. Agents later admitted that this post-raid recovery phase was as complex and emotionally draining as the raids themselves. Breaking down a door is easy, one senior investigator said. Rebuilding a person's trust in humanity, that's the real battle. Many survivors wept as they were given food, blankets, and phones to call family members for the first time in years. Others remained silent, unable to process what had happened. Some asked to go back, a tragic symptom of the trauma and dependence that define modern slavery. In the days following the raids, federal authorities began preparing the next stage of the operation, a long-term dismantling campaign targeting every remaining cell in the syndicate. The goal is not only to prosecute but to permanently disrupt the global financial pipelines that sustain trafficking networks. Officials have already begun sharing intelligence with Interpol and financial crime units in East Asia, tracing the money trail from U.S. storefronts to offshore accounts in Hong Kong, Macau, and Shenzhen. Operation Coast to Coast, agents say, is more than an enforcement victory. It's a statement. declaration that the era of trafficking under the cover of normalcy is ending, and that the United States will pursue those who trade in human lives with the same force it once reserved for the world's most dangerous criminals. As one DHS official put it, this wasn't just about shutting down spas, it was about shutting down an empire built on silence. Federal officials confirmed that the victims' identities are being closely protected and that applications are already underway for T visas, a humanitarian provision that allows foreign nationals who have survived trafficking to remain legally in the United States as witnesses and protected persons. For many of these women, this represents not just legal status, but a lifeline, a chance to rebuild their lives free from the fear and coercion that once defined their existence. Each survivor rescued during Operation Coast to Coast has been paired with a dedicated advocate, often from specialized organizations such as Safe Horizon, Polaris, or Freedom Network USA. These advocates are responsible for coordinating everything from shelter placement to trauma therapy, medical care, and legal counseling. Homeland Security described this humanitarian framework as an essential proof of concept, evidence that large-scale federal operations can dismantle criminal enterprises without abandoning those trapped inside them. Officials emphasize that the mission's success lies not only in arrests, but in its ability to rescue, stabilize, and empower victims to testify without fear of retribution. Yet even as recovery teams worked to stabilize survivors, investigators across multiple agencies were already deep into the second phase of the operation, the forensic audit. Every computer, ledger, encrypted phone, and flash drive seized during the raids now sits in federal custody, forming what agents call a digital minefield of evidence. Analysts from the Department of Justice, DOJ, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and the IRS Criminal Division have joined forces to create a joint analytical task force designed to map the financial arteries of the trafficking network. Early findings reveal an astonishing level of sophistication. Funds were moved through more than 200 shell accounts across U.S. banks, fintech platforms, and cryptocurrency exchanges, then funneled through offshore holding firms registered in Hong Kong, Macau, and Singapore. Investigators uncovered microtransactions, hundreds of small transfers spread over multiple accounts, a tactic designed to evade automated detection systems used by financial institutions. According to early DHS reports, the network used digital assets such as stablecoins and privacy tokens to obscure the origin of their profits, converting illicit cash from U.S. operations into crypto before reinvesting it in overseas shell corporations. Homeland Security cyber analysts now believe that the same network may have tentacles in other industries. At least a dozen related businesses, including nail salons, import-export companies, real estate offices, and wellness centers, remain under active surveillance. These locations are suspected of serving as replacement fronts for the shuttered parlors, a sign of the traffickers' resilience and adaptability. Federal officials describe the new mission as one of strategic disruption. The objective is no longer just to arrest individuals, but to dismantle the entire infrastructure of exploitation, the accountants, landlords, and financiers who provide cover for traffickers to operate undisturbed. To that end, U.S. agencies are now coordinating with Interpol, Europol, and Chinese law enforcement authorities to trace and locate the overseas ringleaders believed to be orchestrating the network from abroad. Some are thought to be tied to long-standing Chinese triads and transnational crime groups already on international watch lists. A senior Homeland Security official described the raids as the first domino in a much larger chain. He explained that every seized phone and hard drive could expose another layer of the organization, additional front companies, recruiters, and transportation routes. This wasn't a one-time sweep, he said. It's the start of a permanent campaign. The public reaction across the affected communities has been emotional and intense. Residents who live near the raided businesses expressed both shock and relief, saying that what they had long suspected had finally been confirmed. "We always saw vans arriving late at night," one neighbor told reporters, "but we never imagined it was this bad." Local police departments have since been inundated with tips as citizens nationwide begin to re-examine the storefronts and businesses in their own neighborhoods. In response to the revelations, advocacy organizations and lawmakers have begun pushing for stronger state and federal oversight. Proposed measures include mandatory licensing and financial reporting for massage and spa businesses, random unannounced inspections, and required background checks for all business owners and property managers leasing to such establishments. There are also calls to expand trafficking task forces, provide mandatory human trafficking awareness training to code inspectors and health officials, and tighten visa monitoring systems to prevent the exploitation of foreign workers. For many Americans, the case serves as a wake-up call, a reminder that organized exploitation is not a distant foreign crime but a domestic epidemic, thriving in plain sight behind respectable facades and suburban normalcy. It has exposed the deep reach of transnational crime networks into everyday American life, and the urgent need for vigilance not only from government agencies but from ordinary citizens. At Homeland Security's final press briefing, the tone was both resolute and cautionary. Officials made it clear that Operation Coast to Coast, though historic in its scale, was only the beginning. "We've dealt a major blow," one senior official said, "but the threat is evolving faster than we can dismantle it. The illicit massage industry is like a hydra, cut off one head and two more grow back." This hydra effect, traffickers rapidly reopening under new business names and ownership, is why federal authorities are transitioning from reactive enforcement to permanent disruption. Financial accounts are being frozen, shell companies dismantled, property records reviewed, and digital communications monitored for attempts to rebuild the network. The operation, officials said, will continue indefinitely, expanding to track every lead, prosecute every facilitator, and dismantle every remaining safe haven for traffickers. "We're not just chasing traffickers," one agent said quietly. "We're dismantling the system that protects them." For the women rescued, the path ahead is long but no longer hopeless. They face months, even years of recovery, therapy, and legal proceedings. Many have begun learning English, attending counseling sessions, and enrolling in job placement programs through survivor support organizations. Their courage to testify will help ensure that those who profited from their suffering are brought to justice. For the agencies involved, the mission remains unfinished. The battle against modern slavery continues in data centers, courtrooms, and city streets across America. As one federal commander concluded at a late-night briefing in Washington, the words echoed with quiet conviction. "This was never just about shutting down massage parlors. It was about reclaiming human freedom inside our own borders. And that fight has only just begun."